StudyIQ IAS, अब तैयारी हुई अफोर्डेबल।
हेलो एंड नमस्ते, मेरा नाम है डॉक्टर दीपानिता एंड आपका स्वागत है जियोपॉलिटिकल डायलॉग्स बाय स्टडी आईक्यू। आज हमारे साथ एक इजरायली स्कॉलर है जो लेक्चरर हैं आईडीसी हर्जिलिया में। एंड इस पॉडकास्ट में मैं ग्राउंड जीरो दैट इज इजराइल से एक व्यू पॉइंट लेके आना चाहती हूँ कि 7 अक्टूबर से क्या चल रहा है इजराइल में। एंड जो हमारे साथ हैं गेस्ट, जो हमारे साथ हैं नीना सलामा, तो उनसे हम यही बात करेंगे कि क्या हुआ है, इजराइल का क्या स्टैंड रहा है, गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इजराइल क्या कर रहा है एंड क्या होने वाला है। सो वी गोना टॉक अबाउट वेरियस एस्पेक्ट्स ऑफ दिस वॉर and first of all, welcome Nina to this podcast and thank you for so much for joining me today from Israel. I'm looking forward to what exactly is happening in ground zero in Israel, what is the Israelis up to at least from 7th of October, and if you could, kind of share what is the public opinion regarding this war in Israel. So let's start from 7th October. What happened? Was it an intelligence failure?
So yes, there was indeed an intelligence failure. Many in Israel believed that Hamas terrorist organization is deterred and will not dare to attack Israel. However, October 7th turned to be the most deadliest and horrific day that Israel experienced since its formation in 1948. On this day, more than 4,000 people were brutally killed. More than 3,000 people were brutally injured, and more than 250 people were kidnapped. We're talking about men, women, children, babies, and elderly people who were victims of these attacks. Tragically, Israel is still at war, and we are still counting the number of casualties.
That's the really sad part, because it is being called the 9/11 of Israel. The kind of attack that took place was brutal. My second question then is, Nina, that has Hamas, and you were talking about the organization, has it become synonymous with the Palestinian state movement? Because suddenly, initially it was a terrorist angle, right? Even Indian government talked about it's a terror attack. But soon after, it became a matter of the Palestinian state. It became a matter of, creating two-state solution and all of that. So has Hamas become synonymous with the Palestinian movement?
So Hamas is an Islamist terrorist organization that was founded in 1987 because it opposed the secular approach of the Palestinian Liberation Organization, the PLO, towards the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Its main goals are to establish an Islamic state in Palestine and bring to the Israel's annihilation. They are not interested to get into a peace process with Israel, as many countries believe. They are using national narratives to justify their acts.
What kind of national narratives, Nina, when we're
That
talking about?
That they would like to establish a Palestinian state, that they would like to end the suffering of the Palestinian people, but they are using their population as human shields in order to perpetrate attacks towards Israel. They are using civilian infrastructures such as hospitals and houses,
Human shields,
mosques. Yes, they're using the Palestinian people as human shields, but also civilian infrastructures in order to perpetrate their attacks, turning them into legitimate targets. And this is something which is very important to understand. When the numbers of the casualties in Gaza are published, they do not differentiate between militants or terrorists and civilians. So it is very difficult to understand the exact numbers of the casualties in Gaza. And then Israel is criticized for its campaign that, of course, is a retaliation to the terrorist attacks that occurred in October 7th. So it is a very complicated issue. We hope that we will be able to address this national security threat as soon as possible.
Right. The next question then, Nina, is that bombardment of Gaza. It has been going on. And Israel has been internationally criticized for what it has been doing. Hostages have not been brought back. But internationally, Israel is losing its legitimacy. It's, as Trump puts it, the PR of Israel is going down. Where did Israel go wrong in this?
So Israel is conducting a multi-front war, not only against Hamas in Gaza and the West Bank, not only against HEZBOLLAH in Lebanon, and not only against Shiite militias in Iraq and Syria and the Houthis in Yemen. There are other fronts, such as the psychological front, the diplomatic front, and most importantly, the information front. We live in an era when narratives are more important than facts, where every person with a smartphone becomes a journalist, where ignorance disseminates fake news just by having a mere idea about the understanding of the conflict or the current war. So there are also anti-Israeli organizations that are implemented in different countries during war times and during regular times, and are just inciting the people to go against Israel. So we understand that this war is not a military issue, only a military issue, but as many levels. And this is why it is such a complex war.
Right. But I'm going to come here to the point of defeating terrorism. If you have taken a look, and if you take a look at the geopolitical history, even the hegemon, US, has not been able to defeat terrorism. Afghanistan was a clear-cut failure. You had to leave Afghanistan and Taliban is back in power. So defeating terrorism through military might has not worked. How do you think Israel is going to deal with, let's say, Hamas or Hezbollah militarily? How do because Israel, the first go-to answer is military, strike by military. But that's not going to help in a long term. So what do you think Israel should do to tackle this terrorist issue?
So military action is important to address immediate attacks and security threats. But in order to defeat terrorism, it is important to promote a multidisciplinary approach. It means that it is imperative to cut the fundings of the terrorist organization and to destroy its capabilities and to de-radicalize the population. So it is a process that will take time. But for now, what is important is to address the security threat that these organizations, terrorist organizations, are imposing on Israel. Because the situation right now is very tense, is very complicated, and it is very difficult to maybe diminish the organization while they are still firing against against different targets, civilians and military targets in your country. So first of all, military action is very important, and we see the decrease of missiles coming from, from the Gaza Strip. This is why when we are talking about terrorist organization, the approach should be multidisciplinary.
Right. Here I want to come with a personal anecdote or a story out here. So when I was in Beersheba, and I used to live right, opposite the Ben Gurion University, people don't realize how scary it is to hear that siren going off. You sitting in your dormitory, you are sitting in your room, you're working or kind of reading, and suddenly the siren goes off, and you have that 30 seconds or 40 seconds because you are closer to the border, and you need to rush down to the the bunker ground floor. It's terrifying for someone who has not been used to it. Now, as I understand the Israelis, because you have lived and grown up in that kind of that tensed environment. But for me, it was the first few months of living there in 2015-16, I just didn't know how to handle that pressure coming in. Right? It is a very scary thing. And I think most people don't understand the kind of security nightmare is there because what is constantly happening in the neighborhood. And living like this does indicate that you're fighting at different levels. It's just not the military, but also at a psychological level, you are fighting against what is happening in your immediate neighborhood. Right. Okay, Nina, moving on to the next question. Many countries have started criticizing Israel internationally, including South Africa. My question then is that how did Israel, or how is Israel losing this war internationally when so many countries, including countries in Asia, countries in Africa, are publicly calling out Israel? Do you think it's going to impact Israel internationally, or how do you see it panning out?
So what is interesting is that, since the Arab Spring erupted in 2010, the Palestinian issue was marginalized, enabling Israel to forge good relations and normalize its relations with different countries in West Asia and in Africa. We can just recall, for instance, the Abraham Accords that were signed in 2020 between Israel, the UAE, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco. There were also regional initiatives as the I2U2 alliance between India, Israel, the US, and the UAE, and also the IMEC project, which is the India, Middle East, European corridor, that wanted to bring to prosperity to West Asia, not only to focus on, on crisis, but to stabilize the region and bring to prosperity to all countries in the region. The only problem is that many commentators say that these, state and non-state actors that are part of the axis of terror were not interested in these positive, developments, and then wanted to bring back Israel when it was isolated regionally and internationally, putting back in the front the Palestinian issue. So we were discussing about the information war, and it is a war that Israel today is conducting regionally, but also internationally. And as we said, narratives are the most important thing today. They are more important than facts. And this is why there is a war between good and bad, between the light and the obscurity in the world. And I think that many countries should come to Israel, many representatives of countries should come to Israel and to see what the Israeli people are enduring. I can tell you that just this week, there was an important delegation from India of journalists, academicians, and scholars, and so on, that came to Israel in order to show their support and to understand what kind of reality the Israelis are enduring. And I think that it is important to other countries, whether they are civilians or from the leadership of these countries, to come to Israel and to see our point of view and to make their own idea about the current conflict. So I believe that an open dialogue in which all kinds of ideas are shared can build a more educated approach and a more educated stance of Israel in this current war.
Correct. So a more, a sensitive, a more balanced approach is needed to understand the narratives that are going on. Correct. So Nina, my question next is about the public opinion in Israel. What is the kind of support that the current leader Netanyahu has, or is there a backlash going on? Because as I understand from my friends, there is a strong backlash against him. So what is the public opinion there?
So we are a democratic country. And in a democratic country, there are many voices that are heard and that are expressed. And it is an healthy, process of a democratic country. I can tell you that during the current war and also in regular times, there are voices that support the current government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and other voices that are not. And it is acceptable, and it is legitimate, and it is good for a democratic country. So, of course, that there are voices that are criticizing the current government and others that are supporting it.
So in this, the chaotic public opinion, there's also a question about the future of Gaza. Because if you see what we are reading in the media is that there's a very strong voice that is supporting that Gaza is going to be like West Bank. But on the other hand, there's a strong voice saying that just stop, enough is enough. So in this light, where do you see the public opinion coming in regarding the future of Gaza?
So what is important today is to destroy the Hamas, to destroy Hamas military and governmental capabilities. And I think that in this regard, all Israelis accept and support this approach. Now, we have also hostages that are still captive in the Gaza Strip. And there is like a debate in Israel that try to see how these hostages should be released, whether it is in military operations or in a deal. Now, why this debate is like occurring in Israel today? Because all Israelis would like to see, right, the hostages coming back to Israel. Because there were in the past other hostages deal in which terrorists were released, and Yehia Sinwar, that is currently the head of the military wing of Hamas, was released, and we saw the catastrophic implications of the release of these kinds of terrorists. So we have to understand how exactly this delicate situation and issue should be addressed. But in order to, we hope that for now, we should address the current national security threat of Israel and the current national threat that Hamas is imposing on Israel. And when this will be done, we will be able to think about reconstruction projects in Gaza, about thinking or collaborating with the Palestinians in order to understand who will govern Gaza after Hamas will be destroyed. Because Israel would like to live peacefully with its neighboring countries, but unfortunately, there are elements in these countries which are state and non-state actors that do not want or do not accept or do not even recognize Israel's right to exist. And this is the essence of the problem. When this will be achieved, and elements that are not radical but are ready to come into a kind of discussion and negotiations with the Jewish state, we will be able to live peacefully together and to address and maybe even develop the Gaza Strip.
So you do see a future of two-state solution?
You know what? The question is whether it is a two-state solution or a three-state solution. And
I keep saying that. It's a three-state solution, yes.
I will explain why. Because the Palestinian leadership is fragmented. On the one hand,
Hamas.
In Gaza, exactly. On the other hand, we have the Palestinian Authority, and they are rivals. And they have different goals. Hamas want to strive to destroy Israel, right? While the Palestinian Authority strive to establish a Palestinian state. Now, it is important to understand that throughout the years, there were many initiatives in which Israel was ready to compromise on many issues, including territorial issues, when Israel was ready to withdraw from about more than 90% of the territory in the West Bank. I'm talking, of course, about, for instance, the 2000 Camp David summit, which included Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak and US President Bill Clinton, together with the Palestinian Authority Chairman Yasser Arafat. Or the 2008 Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert that presented a peace proposal to the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, and the 2010 negotiations that occurred between US President Barack Obama, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and the President of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. So Israel was always ready to extend its hand to peace and to seek solutions that would lead Israel to make generous compromises in order to address this and maybe bring to an end to the conflict. However, the Palestinians always rejected all these offers.
Right. Coming to the northern borders, Hezbollah. How does or what is the plan to tackle Hezbollah now? Hezbollah has become more powerful than what was envisaged in 80s, right? And if you take a look at the kind of missiles it is having or the kind of strategy it is having, it is the next challenge that Israel is going to have. Forget this border skirmishes. I'm talking about an out and right a war that's going to break out. Hezbollah is going to be there. So how does Israel plan to tackle this problem?
So, there is an attrition war that is like taking place in the northern border of Israel. Hezbollah is conducting this attrition war against Israel by firing more than 5,000 missiles, rockets, and mortar balls to cities in northern Israel. There are more than 25 people who were killed in these attacks, 20,000 acres that were burnt, and more than 940 houses and infrastructures that were damaged. Due to this reality, there are currently more than 60,000 Israelis that are displaced from their homes. And there were several diplomatic initiatives that were promoted by the US and France, but unfortunately, they did not bear fruit. So Hezbollah is relentlessly attacking Israel and threatening to launch a full-scale war. Just in the last few days, they also threatened Cyprus and said that they will also attack Cyprus because they have a kind of security military cooperation with Israel. Now we have to understand that Cyprus is part of the European Union. So the question is whether this war will be fought between Hezbollah and Israel or also will turn into an interregional war. We will have to see. And Israel is, of course, preparing for this possible scenario.
Right. What about Iran? I want to understand what is Israel's opinion or Israel's stand regarding Iran, because at the end of the day, these are just proxies of Iran. And somewhere or the other, Iran is the bigger danger in the region rather than Hamas or Hezbollah. The day the purse strings are cut, these proxies have gone, they're not going to go anywhere, right? So what about Iran? How does Israel see Iran?
So Israel, of course, is perceiving Iran as being an existential threat. We saw that it has many proxies in the Middle East that are part of the axis of terror that Iranians established throughout the years. And we should remind the attack of drones and missiles that Iran launched in the night between the 13th and 14th of April. And I can tell you that many Israelis were not able to sleep that night because it looked like it was the end of Israel, right? But thanks to many allies and different countries from the region and from Western countries, 99% of these missiles and drones were intercepted. So it is true that Iran is the head of all what is going on, right, in the region. And Israel is relentlessly trying to address this threat. And we know that Iran is also promoting and establishing nuclear capabilities, which will also be an important and significant challenge when they will be able to achieve it. And Israel is trying to do everything in its power in order to hinder this process and in order to stop this process, because they are not posing, a national security threat only to Israel, but also to other countries in the region and in the world. We're talking, for instance, about the Gulf countries in West Asia, but also towards other countries that are not necessarily perceived to be part of their Islamist ideology that they would like to promote in the region and elsewhere in the world. So, of course, if we'll be able to address the threat of Iran, many problems in the region and in the world will be addressed as well. Now, there were many Iranians in Iran that were very vocal about the government and that wanted to maybe change it or get a reform or reform the government. But tragically, the government is just arresting them and torturing them and not allowing them to go through this process. So Iran is the main problem in the region, and Israel perceives it to be like as such.
Right.
Yeah.
And right, Nina, and I get your point about Iran, but there's another player that we have to talk about is US. Elections are around the corner, right? November. Do you think before the elections take place and the whole fervor begins, a peace proposal will work from the US side? Will US successfully mediate and bring peace between Israel and Hamas in the region? Do you think that's going to happen?
So President Joe Biden presented a three-phase deal that would include a full and complete ceasefire, a withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza, the release of hostages, the release of hundreds of terrorists from the Palestinian side, and the reconstruction of Gaza. Israel declared that the war will not end until its goals are achieved, namely the release of all hostages and the destruction of Hamas military and governmental capabilities. And until these goals are not achieved, the peace proposal of Prime Minister Biden from the Israeli side will not work.
Right. Coming to India, where do you see India's dehyphenation policy, and do you think India has been able to balance its relation with Palestine as well as with Israel?
So India has a unique foreign policy. It maintains good relations with Israel and the Palestinian Authority and treats them separately while promoting a balancing act. In the beginning of the war, Prime Minister Narendra Modi was one of the first leaders to support Israel and condemn the October 7th attacks. He also reiterated India's historical support for the Palestinian cause. He called both Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and President Mahmoud Abbas in order to get some updates about the development of the war. And also, India sent 70 tons of humanitarian aid to the Palestinians. So India is promoting this approach not only towards Israel and the Palestinian Authority, but also with other, states, actors in the world, having good relations with the US and Russia, having good relations with Iran and Saudi Arabia. So it is a very unique foreign policy approach. I don't foresee that India will pick sides. On the contrary, I believe that India will continue to promote its de-hyphenation policy since it allows India to have a flexible foreign policy as a rising power, as a country that is very much active in regional and international organizations. And it also allows India to promote many bilateral relations that can promote its national interests.
So, Nina, my last question. You are an expert on India-Israel relations, right? And I just want to know that what is the USP of India-Israel? What, according to you, is the highlight of India-Israel relations?
I think that the people-to-people relations are very good. And this is something which characterizes good relations between countries. Of course, that the governmental relations are important. But I think that this podcast also exemplifies how we can work together, collaborate together, and see how we can put forward our relations between our great nations.
Right. Thank you so much for joining me, Nina, for this podcast. And thank you to all of you for joining me in today's Geopolitical Dialogues. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you and see you.
StudyIQ IAS. अब तैयारी हुई अफोर्डेबल।